we live yet? Oh, apparently it's live. Hello, YouTubes. Hello, Poggians. Welcome to Pair of Geeks. And yes, it's just me in the seat tonight. So tonight we are going to talk about role-playing games until my voice dies. So, yes, it is just me. No Jason this week. He is performing because Jason is a musician. And it's his mum is a music teacher who's retiring, and his mum's putting on the last concert she'll ever do, and Jason has gone up to perform. So that's cool. So it's just me. But in other Jason-related news, and I don't know how much I'm actually allowed to say, so I'm going to say very little. He's doing his first RPG writing gig at the moment. And I suppose it's not really official until he submits a final draft that's accepted. But hey, he's becoming an RPG author. So congrats to Jason there. So who have we got in the chat? Anyone? No, apparently according to my live statistics, no one. That possibly means things are broken, because normally there's a few of you who sort of tune in right for the start. So let's talk RPGs. And there's a few things I want to cover today. The first is, and if there is anyone watching, please can you let me know if the sound's okay? You know, is the stream coming through all right? Or are there any issues there? Let me know, because I'm by myself today, so I couldn't test the setup. So, RPGs, and okay, hello Feral Gamers Inc. Nice to see you, Jay. In fact, I interviewed Jay from Feral Gamers Inc. at UK Games Expo. He's one of our sponsors for Complas 2, and I edited that interview yesterday. In fact, I edited it the day before as well, and it all went terribly wrong. I rendered it incorrectly and didn't save my project and had to start again, and I did that yesterday, and so that is now in the can. I can give you a secret link if you like. Not whilst I'm on air, though. A little bit busy at the moment. So, hello, and yeah, do check out Feral Gamers Inc. stuff, actually. They have some really cool sort of military-inspired RPG games. So, no worries. I will, I'll send you the link, no worries. Right, so today I want to take a look at this one. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And I want to talk about problem GMs. No, problem players. And how to deal with them as a GM. There really is only two solutions to a problem GM, and that's either volunteer to GM yourself or find another group. Or maybe nominate another player to be the GM. Anyway, what do you do about problem players in your group? So that's going to be my kind of topic for the day. But feel free to ask questions in chat about RPGs, and I'll give you my verdict, and so will other members of the audience, and we can chat about any issues at your table, or just talk about some cool ideas, flesh ideas out a little more maybe. If you've got an idea that you've been sitting on and you need to cultivate it a bit more, let us know. Or even if you just got a cool idea, share it, and we'll use that idea in our games too, and it'll be awesome. On that topic, I had a bit of an idea tonight, actually. I've been working on this augmented reality stuff at work, and I had this idea for something that I'm really tempted to use in my games. So, so my idea is this, because, you know, I use dungeon setups occasionally in my games, you know, lay out the miniature terrain and things. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if, you know, obviously doing a bit of augmented reality and stuff for RPGs would be cool with a miniature setup. You could make your dragons breathe fire and all that kind of stuff. But that's just special effects nonsense. What if you did an encounter based on it? And so I've had this idea for an encounter that I'm kind of tempted to make. And the basic principle is, like, in augmented reality, you can see something in the ethereal plane. And then if one player gets whatever plot MacGuffin, they get the device to sort of see where the ethereal creature is. And then if you make that action of looking at the game board to see where it is, their action, then there could be sort of that's it for that's their action for the turn, and then everyone else is kind of like, running around at their sort of direction, as it were. So maybe give the player like 5 seconds to have a look through the augmented reality device, and then 5 seconds to explain without pointing or using the physical prop to describe where the ethereal thing is. Maybe that would be a cool encounter. So I'm tempted to actually write that. So we'll see. We'll see. Watch this space. Got enough coding to do for Com+2, which I'll just give a quick plug to now. If you're into RPGs, which if you're watching this channel, you probably are, then come to Com+2. It's an online RPG convention that raises money for charity. It's free to attend, and what I'll be doing for that convention is, with Jason, we'll be hosting the Pair of Geeks telethon stream, which is the biggest RPG prize giveaway in history. Asterisk. The asterisk being that we know of. There may have been a bigger one that we didn't hear about, but we have hundreds upon hundreds of RPG prizes we'll be giving away over a 24-hour period in a non-stop prize giveaway extravaganza. So, on to tonight's kind of core topic, how to deal with bad players at the table, because there are a number of different types of bad player, and I think a lot of them, like, the solutions are different depending on what is it that's causing a problem in the group with this particular player. So one of the earliest things I discovered in my own groups was dice cheats, and people who, and they come in a number of different ways, and I've done videos on this before, but like, there are players who will, for example, roll dice when it's not their turn, and if they get one they like, they might leave it there if it's their go shortly after, and say, I just rolled a 19 as perception check, or whatever it is they're doing. So they're kind of rolling the dice before it's their turn, but if it's nearly their turn and it's good, they'll keep it. If it's not good, they'll pick it up and they'll wait for the GM to ask them to roll, so to get a second chance of a good result. There is a way, like if you get practiced with dice, there's a way of rolling dice up to about D12, where you can pretty much guarantee a high result, and you can spot it because if you're so good at rolling dice that you can guarantee what number's going to come up, the odds are you don't want it to roll too much. So you're looking for like 1.5 rolls. It's like the sweet spot. Half a roll, it's not really a roll. You might get called out. It's just kind of the dice swapping over, and then that's it. No, you want about 1.5 rolls, so it hits the table and then turns. And there is a way to do it with practice. And I solved that long ago. Really, really with the group getting older and more mature. But one of the things I did when I had a problem player of that type in the group is I put dice towers at each corner of the table. So wherever they sat, there was a dice tower nearby. And the thing about dice towers is they're cool things. People like using them. So that solved that problem, because it just meant that, hey, dice tower, cool. And it really just eradicates any possibility of cheating in that way. The interesting thing was the particular problem player, after a month or so of the dice towers being on the table, went and came up with a dice mat so they could go back to rolling. But I'm not a big fan of dice mats at the table, but some of them now I'm beginning to get won over because some of them have some really cool designs on. So that's my first sort of tip. If you've got dice cheats at the table, then put out some dice towers, because they're cool and people will want to use them, and it will solve that problem. I I have had in the past sort of fairly strict rules around dice in the table. If the dice leaves the table, it doesn't count. It's got to be rolled on the table to count. Any dice ends up on the floor, it just never counts. That's kind of like a house rule. And I always try to discourage players from asking to make a roll. So I try to discourage them from asking to make a perception check, because the moment they do that, they're they're kind of not role playing as much as if you just say, look, just describe what you're doing, because you might not need a role. That's how I encourage people away from that mentality. So not only are you encouraging better role play, but you're kind of getting rid of this, the kind of cheater who will roll the dice until it's their go and leave it on a good one, because they're asking for a roll. They're saying perception check, and boom, because they want the shortest amount of time between when they rolled that dice and when they can use it as a result. Because if they wait too long, that kind of dice cheat can't then use that die. It's been too long. They clearly then got to roll the dice again. So if you just discourage people asking to make skill checks, and instead, look, I might just give it to you without a roll if you describe what you're doing, then you get past that, basically. And that's how I've dealt with that problem at the table in the past. But there are other kinds of bad player, not just people who cheat with dice. And I think ultimately, if somebody's the kind of person who will cheat with dice, they're also the kind of person that will miscount ranges and move 8 squares instead of 6, and you kind of don't I think somebody who cheats like that will always cheat, and there's only so much you can do to limit that, and sort of mitigate its impact on the game. And ultimately what that cheating will do is it will refocus the game around that player's character, because they kind of turn into a superstar through their cheating. So really, long term, you've got to ask, do you actually want that player in the group? Because their contribution is always going to be shifting the focus onto themselves, which brings us neatly to the topic of alpha gamers. Now this is an interesting one to me, because there are... Alpha gaming isn't necessarily... It's kind of a social skill issue, but at the same time, it can just be because somebody's really into a game, and they're enjoying it, and they want to engage with the game, and so they kind of talk a bit more. It becomes a problem when they start kind of talking over other players, and that becomes an issue at the table. Now, I have experienced this in my groups, and to be honest, try to avoid the topic, but when I was younger, it was probably me as well. But there's it's a certain kind of person that's more prone to it. Is the more confident person, but it really can be a per session kind of thing. Like sometimes people just are really in the mood to play, and they can dominate a bit too much. As a GM, you need to control that. And I think there's a couple of ways to do it. Firstly, it can be controlled with system. I think I've mentioned on the channel before, I actually created my own RPG system that very much controls when players want to act, by keeping the emphasis on it still being a player decision, but allowing the players, or sort of the system encourages players to come forward kind of in a sort of balanced way. And that kind of also addresses wallflowers, people who like to sit on the side and not really participate. And so a systemic solution, by looking at different RPG systems, might be able to solve that. But I think you can also bring awareness at the table for making sure everyone has their time at the table. One of the things I started doing a few years ago is I was in a group, and I know I'm one of the more outgoing people, and I knew that there were 2 players in that group who were more kind of wallflowers. And so, being that player in the group, I would freely say, look, I could do this, but why don't you take this scene? You've not had much time yet. So as a player, I could solve that problem. And I've had to step in as a GM before, when I've had an alpha gamer at the table who was just dominating proceedings, and I simply explained it as it was. Look, I know you're engaged in infusion stuff, but there are, and in this particular case, there was quite a lot of people at the table. There's like 8 other players, or 7 other players at the table. Could I just ask you to not take this initiative and just allow the other players I want to throw some spotlight on some players that haven't had as much time at the table yet. And it doesn't need to be a confrontational assertion. You can do this in a quite gentle and friendly manner, and it's really just appealing to their sense of empathy to say, "Oh, look, yeah, you're right. I've had a lot of time." There is a lot of noise going on outside the window here. I think there's children playing with toys that are quite loud. I don't know if that's coming out on the stream. It's some kind of siren thing, and it's really loud, and that's just really awkward timing. Oh my god. Right, I should also explain, I've had a migraine today. So, it's not been a great day. A bit of a headache still. There's some kid outside with a loud siren whilst I'm live streaming. That's just marvellous. So, it's kind of breaking, really. So, hello Michael Bonfield, welcome to the chat and channel. And I'm sorry that noise is coming through. Let kids be kids. It's just a little... What I might try doing is, if it carries on, I might try swapping the microphone to the other side. Hello Fuke. Always a pleasure to see you, Fuke. And Marshall Monk says, "Hi Becky, hope you're enjoying the weather today. Have you got any tips on being a better role player? I usually find myself in a DM role, but I've joined a campaign and want to do a good job." Okay, let's talk about that. But before I do, there's one thing I really must do, because I have to do this every week. It's a rule, is I have to shout out the most awesome people in the world, which is on a poster behind me, so I'm going to turn around. The most awesome people in the world are Russell Higgins, Jolly Mangina, Umber, Mark Threlfall, Brandon Fishwick, Dave Poirier, Fuke Enterprises, Philip Bate, Elizabeth Chai-Praditkel, and Nate Hanshan. Thank you so much for your continued support, guys, for being Patreon supporters of this channel and helping us keep going. And I'm going to talk a little bit about future of the channel and this show later on, if I remember and the headache doesn't kill me. So, how to be a better role player? It's an interesting one because role-playing is so multifaceted. And, if you're not role-playing well, there could be any number of reasons for it. And it might just be, at the end of the day, the GM, we often talk about, improving the games from a GM perspective. The GM is only part of a good session. The GM can't make a great session. They just need to put the pieces in place and make them sufficiently good for the players to bounce off it. And part of the job is from the players. You need that input from the players to be good as well, to have a really magical session. And I'll go back to something I said at the start of the stream in a completely different context, which is never ask to make a roll. Because the moment you do, you're playing the game mechanics. So you're not so much doing the RP stuff as you are doing the game. So, always just describe what you're doing. And, don't forget to introduce your character either. And sometimes this takes a bit of cooperation from GMs. I had a GM once that really just started the adventure and didn't give us a chance to introduce our characters. It's like, okay, you're in a bar and you meet someone, really sort of straight into it. And I kind of, wanting this opportunity to introduce my character, just said, can I just go back a few minutes beforehand and do a quick scene? And I kind of, alpha gamed a little bit to sort of get that opportunity to introduce the character, because I think it's important. So, if possible, and without being as assertive as I was, try to make sure when you first introduce your character that the other players get a good sense of the same things you'd get a sense of when you meet someone. So how do they appear? Describe appearance is obviously a staple. Get that done, so people know what to be imagining you as. But it's kind of an interesting thing in that, when we're playing a role-playing character, we always want to present the strength, especially if we're playing a hero and, I'm really muscular, or wiry reflexes and all this kind of stuff. We're describing things you wouldn't observe. When you observe someone, you usually notice the bad things, right? It's like nobody ever tells you your drains smell nice, and so I often when I'm describing a character, I might do something like, it's a white dragonborn, but the scales are slightly matted. And as you look the dragonborn up and down, and it appears to be well dressed, but the one thing your eye keeps getting drawn back to is the nose hair. That's just this one nose hair that just desperately screams, "Pluck me," So I like to do stuff like that myself, just to sort of bring in something that other players will bounce off. Because I think if you can get some good RP going with another player at the table, then that can really make a session. But they can't do that if you don't give them the tools. And as a player, you can do it just as much as a GM. Give your compatriots at the table something to bounce off. So is that something negative? And I like to do little sort of quirks and stuff on my characters. 5e came along with its ideals, bonds, and the other one. I stopped using them now. And I think it was good when it came out, because it kind of said to everyone, okay, look, if you don't really know where to begin with RP, here are some things you can use. And what I found with 5e, I mean, I don't like randomly generating those anymore, because I've kind of seen a lot of those. And I'd rather choose something that's a bit more world specific or a bit more unique if I can, if the GM will allow it. But quite often you kind of focus on like one of those might actually come through in your role play. And to be honest, that's enough. You only really need one thing that really makes you stand out. Just make that one thing something interesting, something that really brings something to the character. Maybe the reason Dragonborn, or this particular Dragonborn, has a really high charisma is because people are so distracted by that blinking nose hair. I mean, I probably wouldn't go that far with something so ridiculous, but yeah, bring life through quirks to role playing. Have something that is a negative to your character when you bring it to the table, and I think you're off to a good start. Right, so we seem to have a few more questions, so bye Fuke, off to work he goes again. So yeah, it seems the kids have quietened down now, so that thankfully didn't last too long. So hello the random view, so welcome to the channel, and so hi Becky, real basic question here. Can you recommend a perfect pre-made module for true beginners? So if you're a true beginner, I'm going to make an assumption here that you're playing D&D 5th edition. And truth be told, I don't really play modules. I mean, most of my groups are very experienced role players, so we just have so many ideas now that, I mean, there's so many stories in each of us that we want to tell. We never get the chance to tell those, let alone playing one purchased from a store. I did, however, play the start of the Mines of Fandelver, which struck me as a great introductory campaign, so it might be worth checking that out. But I'm going to suggest, actually, that people in the audience, if you've got more experience with 5e modules, maybe suggest some that might fit that role. Because I'm probably not the greatest person to ask about modules. And one of the reasons I think for that, because I've role-played so many years now, I mean, gosh, goes back to when I was quite young. When I was young. And I do still occasionally read modules, because they can be treasure troves of cool ideas. there's nothing wrong in reading a module for ideas. I don't know if I personally would enjoy the railroad nature of a module so much now, though, because they tend to be... There's only so many endings you can write. I don't know if you ever saw Bandersnatch on Netflix, but it was a very meta, choose-your-own film. And it had to be very meta because there was only so many endings they can film. Because if you've got an option, that creates 2 possible endings, and then another option becomes 4 endings, becomes 8, becomes 16, 32, 64, and so forth. A book can't do that, but role-playing games can, and often do. So I like to mine modules for ideas rather than actually play the modules themselves. Having said that, when you're new, obviously that's a lot harder. So yeah, go for something simple along the lines of Mines of Fandelver or another beginner D&D module that hopefully somebody in the chat might recommend some others, and accept that it's a book, there is a path that it will follow. You might have options at some point, but you only ever really get the illusion of choice in a module. So you might get the choice of order you do things in, and you might miss some content out, but you kind of go and do that thing, and each one is like a tram track. I only played the start of the Mines of Fandelver myself, so I didn't go all the way through it. So good news, I can't give you spoilers. And I was playing, I didn't actually read the book to get ideas. So, but that strikes me as a good starter one. All right. Also, thank you for all you do on this channel. You're welcome. We love it. We're narcissists. I say we because obviously normally Jason's here. Just me today because he's off gallivanting. He is away next week, but we're going to try and do something that brings him into the show anyway. So we'll see. Right, a bit more chat to catch up on before I continue. So, Space Communist, hello, welcome to the channel. Role-playing must be better with English accents. I would argue everything's better with an English accent. Thank you very much. I met the director of the first 2 Dungeons and Dragons film. I'm trying to remember his name. I'm afraid I don't. I remember his nickname. Hollywood calls him the Prince of Darkness, not the Prince, the Prince, because he was a director of photography in a lot of horror films. I met him once at a convention, and one of the things he said was that he always likes to hire for his films directly from Middle-earth. Of course, he's referring to Britain in that sentence. He'd rather have English accents because you are essentially getting the authentic Middle-earth. And I want to disagree with that statement, but he's kind of right. Our perception of fantasy is very European, Western European centric. So, it's fantasy in its kind of default setting. It's sort of somewhere between, depending on whether, if you do sort of Conan style, well, that's Dark Ages. If you do sort of Warhammer style, well, that's medieval. But it's always this kind of Western European centric default setting. And I want to kind of disagree with that because, I want to be able to say, well, if you go out to Chult, it's more South America, right? If you keep it sort of 5th edition focused, you got the rainforest, you got the dinosaurs and stuff. That's such an is the word anathema? I forget. To what a conventional fantasy is, and I think exploring different perceptions of what fantasy is, sort of grounding them in different worlds, it's something I really want to do more of. But I can't do it with my real life group because we use terrain for that, and I'm not building more terrain for the house is full of minis. Can't handle anymore. I'm not going to build different terrains. But it is something I could maybe do online, and I'd like to experiment more with that kind of thing. Have a Inca inspired fantasy setting or something. I do find it, though, really distracting if I'm watching a fantasy film and I hear an American accent. I'm like, I remember when I first saw A Knight's Tale, and you got this sort of American being an English knight, and I was like, this this doesn't work. This does not work. It's like, no. Anyway, you're welcome. So that's it, all caught up on the chat, and I can't for the life of me remember where I'd got up to on handling bad players. So I'll come back to it later. Instead, I want to talk about Fate Forge. So we don't normally talk about or kind of do promotions in this manner. Oh, my chat's just disconnected, so bear with me a second. I'm going to play you a little video whilst I reconnect the chat. Don't forget, Plus will be running October 11th to October 13th. 3 days of role-playing and 24 hours during the middle of that. For 24 hours, I'll be on this channel giving away loads of RPG stuffs. Now, we don't normally do sort of talk about... Well, I'd like to talk a bit about Kickstarters and stuff coming up. But I don't want to be a sort of channel that's kind of sold out to advertising. However, this is one I have backed myself. I don't back many Kickstarters anymore. Reaper Bones just announced that Bones, God, what was it, 5 will be coming. I think it was September the 2nd or something, and I'll probably back that for a few models. But honestly, I'm still painting Bones 3. But this one really caught my eye. We spoke about it before on the channel. It's the new D&D 5e setting book from Studio Agate. And it caught my eye at the Games Expo because I saw the French version of the book, and the Kickstarter is for the English version. I saw the French version of the book, and it was by far the prettiest RPG book I've ever seen. The quality of the art was absolutely astounding. Shadows of Esteron is a pretty book. Fate Forge, I think they've upped the ante somewhat. So anyway, on DriveThruRPG at the moment, you can download the Player's Guide for free. And you can see for yourself just how beautiful this book is, because this is I think it's like 55, 60 odd pages, and it's astonishing. I mean, bear in mind this is from my printer, okay, but you know, there's some armor on that page. We've got I'm just gonna just a random content page, and it's just pretty. It's, you know, if I'm completely honest, I'm a sucker for beautiful art, and I try and get that on screen without it being all shiny, and it's absolutely astounded me when I saw it. And there's so much colour and life in this. Like, even on the rules pages, let me just open up a random page of text. It's so decorated. It's amazing. But it's not the only thing that struck me about this. As I've had a flick through this. I haven't really had time to digest this yet. But I've had a flick through it. And so here's the character sheet. There's a few things that really interested me. So you've got it's a multi-page sort of sheet in the back of this book. I'm just going to sort of show you. There's quite a lot of pages to it. I don't know if they're all necessary, but it's so nice to have full colour character sheets again, because you don't kind of get that anymore. It used to be like you could buy them, but then the kind of home printing took off, and they went black and white, and they never returned to colour when colour printers came in. So yeah, I mean, it's just, oh, it's astounding. But there was a few other things that really interested me as I was flicking through here. The first is one thing I did in my own RPG, actually, but you don't often see it, is so often in RPGs, everything's divided by races. Religions are racial, languages are racial, and quite often, strangely, cities are racial, which in no way reflects our world at any point in its history. We kind of have this image of the past that people who lived in Britain in the 12th century were all British. It's like, no, like the evidence doesn't support that. There were black people. There were Viking invaders, well documented. Ireland even had a special word for what they referred to as black-skinned Vikings. It was Dane, because Irish writers back in the day would refer to any overseas invader was a former Viking. If they were white, they called them Vikings. If they're black, they called them Danes. A distinction not made with English writers, who would use the terms based on the geography of where they believed that the invaders had come from. So anyway, they've made it mostly their cultures that they've got in here. They've made them quite geographical. I'm just going to read one randomly now. So this is, I think, the first one. Oh, it's the second one, I think. But anyway, so Ajagar. Peoples, humans, Aldaron in the jungles, and members of every species in the big coastal cities. So, first of all, they're accepting that this, your culture, you can be any race in any culture, more or less. They're not saying that all Dragonborn have this culture. They're saying this culture exists. These are the races that are common in this culture, which I think is how it should be. I mean, that's what reflects our world. If we want our games to tell us stories about our world, or if we want our games to reflect our world in any way, then that's the way it should be. I mean, that's what's most realistic. It's how the world is. So next statement, languages. So languages are now tied to your culture. Makes sense. But interestingly, and this is the one that really caught my eye, because I'd never thought about doing this before, writing system, Elvish in this particular language. Like the languages have been separated from the writing system, and that makes a lot of sense. Like some cultures only have an oral tradition, and it's just, what a beautiful idea. It just, I love it, because it makes some sense. And then it'll talk a little bit about the actual sort of culture itself. There's paragraphs of text that kind of follow each one, which I won't go into now. You can feel free to download this for free off DriveThruRPG right now. There was another one that really caught my eye as well. I haven't had a chance to properly digest this yet, but they're called the Half-Orcs Merosi. So, okay, different name, fair enough. They consider the term half-orc to be a derogatory term. Sorry, I'm dropping pages of this on the floor whilst I'm trying to talk. And what's quite different about them, and if I just put that there for a moment, is these half-orcs are actually quite pretty. And I was talking to the founder of Studio Agate about this design choice, and it was really interesting, because one of the things he said that came from their designers, and they use they have a lot more female designers in their team, and I think, without being too political about it, I think it strengthened their product to get ideas from a different perspective in. One of the things that their designers had wanted to do and wanted to raise was that when the way genetics works, we are hardwired to mix our genetics. It's kind of, evolution's dependent on it, and we find pheromones in people who have opposite immune systems to us more attractive. It's the way biology works, and one of the things that can often happen when people of two races mix is actually the children are often quite beautiful. And so their thinking on it was, well, actually, half-orcs could be quite beautiful. And, really, the whole sort of half-orc term to there it's kind of this this insinuation that they're violent and barbaric, and it's a slur, but to a Malosi, and actually, they've got their pride, as it were, and stuff, and it's very fresh take on doing, a half species. I really love that. It's just a really fresh take, and so I decided I would back this Kickstarter, which is why I'm talking about it. And we've talked the Studio Agate into putting an extra stretch goal on the end of the campaign, where if they hit that particular stretch goal and it does very well, they'll make a donation to Complus. But anyway, not gonna use that as a go do this now, because no. I thought it was interesting. It interested me, and I wanted to show you guys and share that with you, because I did talk about it before in the previous weeks, and because it was such a beautiful book. But now I've had a chance to kind of look a little bit at it, and I'm like, yeah, this is actually really fresh, and it's got some great things. The book is a 5e setting book, and so you play it with 5e, but it's sort of a new game, so it's kind of a fresh take on 5e. But at the same time, it's still 5e, so looks really interesting from what I've seen so far, and I'm looking forward to spending some more time to digest it a bit more. So welcome back, Fuke. Nice to have you back briefly. I presume you're sort of on break and customers have disappeared for the moment. So you've just missed me basically plugging somebody else's product for once. Talking of plugging, I'm also doing another little project at the minute, which will appear on Parageeks 2 at some point. So I decided to enter a film competition. Don't know why. I mean, this is kind of not really RPG related, I apologise. But I love filmmaking, so I decided to enter this film competition and make a short movie. It's going to be like 2-3 minutes long, but it's kind of gone into production. It has a cast and a crew, and we did do one before, which appeared on Parageeks 2. It's called The Estate Agent. It's a 30-second film, including credits. So this time we've done. We're quadrupling the runtime at least. We're going to aim for a 2 to 3 minute film. So looking forward to that. So Fuke says, my Jungle 3.5 D&D game just did a murder mystery. Cool. The punishment hasn't been dealt out yet, but how do I introduce a ruler to the land who didn't deal with any of the problems the PC dealt with? How do you introduce a ruler to the land? I mean, the first thing I decide when I'm doing my world building is I decide what kind of government this is. It's always the first question I ask, because I think that helps set up where you go next. Is it a monarchy? So many, like the default fantasy ruler of any land is always a monarch for some reason. I like to mix that up, and I have different forms of government. And once I know what kind of ruler a city or a region has, I then will devise some laws. And the inspiration for that will sometimes come from the geography, but it will often be influenced by the type of government it is. So, if you've got and I'll use some examples from the setting that I wrote for my RPG that is never released and probably never will be, but one day maybe. So I have a city called Moraine Archipelago City, which is a city of 1,000 islands. And consequently, one of the most important things in that city are erosion defences. So the one law that is sort of above all else is you do not tamper with erosion defences. And what's the consequence of a law like that? Well, because the city has to be strict with that, if a kid plays with erosion defences, they're in serious trouble. It's drilled into citizens at a young age. Do not mess around with them. They're important. We're in a fast-flowing river estuary. The banks of all of our islands could erode away. The whole city could be washed away. You don't mess with this stuff. But it gives the city guardsmen free rein. to basically, if they do some harsh policing, they'll just drag the body to the erosion defences and say they were tampering with erosion defences. What's the impact that has on the city? So for me, I actually begin with the ruler, or what kind of ruler at the very least. Because I think it informs so much about the culture and the civilization. And I think if you don't do that, then you're very much running default. And default, of course, implies it's a sort of medieval England or Western Europe, and probably a monarch. So if you're dealing with a monarch who hasn't been dealing with the issues impacting the land, there could be a number of reasons for that. And we just, as we're sort of saying, right, default here is England medieval, let's have a look at some medieval English monarchs. We've had mad ones, we've had ones that were just obsessed with getting different wives so that they could finally sire a son. What are the things that actually interest your monarch that were preventing them from paying attention to the realm? Are they just more interested in hunting boar, like the original king at the start of Game of Thrones just wants to get drunk and hunt boar, and eventually that's what kills them? But spoiler alert. But so what is it that this monarch has been doing that has prevented them from caring about the land? Maybe they're just batshit crazy, like one of our Georges, the second, gosh, I can't remember. Anyway, one of them was absolutely fruitcake. Maybe the royal family is so inbred now that really none of them have paid attention to the realm in generations, or perhaps they're actually overseas campaigning in a crusade, or an anti-orc race war or something. So that's why they haven't dealt with it. They've been distracted by some other issue. Now that other issue doesn't need to be important, it's just more important to that NPC. So let's move on to the next bit of chat. I will build deities before play and most other things after we start. I think one of the things that happens in fantasy worlds is we kind of assume our gods are real. So, in a fantasy world, gods are real, and whatever the creation myth is actually what happened. And okay, but assumedly you have more than one deity in the world, so how does that interact and interrelate? Are gods really all they're cracked up to be? Or are there really minor, pathetic gods? Are the gods actually just equivalent to a very high level adventurer, level 30, 40 type adventurer? They're super powerful beings, but actually they didn't create the world either. They got created too. Whatever your system is, the thing is, it doesn't really change the world for me. It changes some people in the world, because ultimately a religion in your world, whatever deities that they believe or worship or aim to improve the support base of, whatever that religious faction is doing, it is just one faction. And whilst it might well be the case that in your world the gods are real and they did make it and everything else, and that might inform some geography, it might inform some cultures, because the gods will have had influence over the cultures for X millennia, whatever. But it doesn't really inform the factions at play in your game world. So I would think a little more about that before getting the game going myself, because I think that's where you can really sort of build intrigue. I did a video, I think it was actually, was it an Ask a DM or was it a standalone? I can't remember if we were doing Ask a DM then, but near the start of the year, we covered the topic of world building, where people kind of have different kingdoms, and they kind of have the political intrigue between kingdoms, and I would argue that if you keep it within one kingdom, you can have a lot more intrigue. I do remember now it was a standalone video, and I think I called it something along the lines of court intrigue. And it's well worth a watch if you're thinking of doing a sort of an aristocracy or at least a court intrigue based game, because I think there's a lot more that can be done within one country than can be done between countries, because at that level of politics you've got embargoes and wars and not a lot else. It's not really intrigue. So Fuke says, I killed off all the old gods. My world is called Teria, the land of the new gods. They are a Greek Nordic inspired and off for real this time. Off for real? Not quite following what you mean by that. Are for real, maybe? So, I mean, I do love, using the different pantheons of gods in my games. I must admit, it is a bit of a weakness of mine. Mainly because A, you can get the minis, and B, like, you've got all this fantastic world building that the players already at least partially understand and know, rather than creating fresh gods where the players wouldn't have a clue what's going on. So my current game is I'm working my way through the Egyptian gods. So sorry, I'm just going to read the next thing Fuke says. The part you're confused on, heading back on floor. I don't know if that cleared anything up for me. I'm just a dumb YouTube presenter. I get confused. Right. So, where were we on the topic of... Oh, I see, you were off for real this time. Not the gods. Fair enough. Now I get it. Sorry, bit slow. Did I mention the migraine this morning? Right. So, and I noticed also there's less people watching this week, so it seems that Jason actually pulls in all the viewers, not me. And there's less chat going on as well. So, yeah, apparently you're only here for Jason. I want to talk a little bit about the future of Parageeks, because I want Parageeks to have a future. Obviously I've done this channel since 5 odd years or something now. I forget exactly. But as you can no doubt tell from the subscriber numbers and the fact that actually this week they're a bit lower than last week, is we are a small channel. We've never really made it on YouTube, and I honestly, with what we do, I don't think we ever will. So, clearly in, says Fuke. Yeah, you see, maybe that's why people don't don't ask the questions unless Jason's here, because I don't understand anything. Fuke says, clearly I'm here for both of you, or just you. Tell Jason either. Thank you, Fuke. Yeah, but obviously we're not a big channel, and we're not really growing anymore. And if anything, we're kind of shrinking a bit because we've massively changed our format. So everyone who came for the old kind of content, who isn't interested in this new format, is leaving, and we're not gaining new subscribers at a massive rate. And so I know we could get more growth by going back to the old kind of content and doing more of it. But I don't want to do that because it's a lot of work. And let's face it, after 5 years, we didn't become a big channel doing that. Even though it was a stronger growth strategy, it's still ultimately, I think we just got to accept this is a small channel, and that's the way it is, and I'm okay with that. I'm still going to keep doing it because I love doing it, and because if we didn't do anything with this channel, then Con+ would fail, and for me and Jason, Con+ is a big part of our lives. That convention does so much good. If it's successful this year, touch wood, I hope it is, and if it continues to be successful, then it's worth doing this channel, even though this channel kind of largely isn't that successful. It's a small channel, and I think we're okay with that. But I think this show can get better, and we can do more with it. So I love the whole giving advice thing, but ultimately, I suppose there's only so much advice to give when you've got the same people largely tuning in each week, and a few new ones. That's great. It's fantastic. Always great to see new people tuning in. And I love talking to you guys, and it means a lot to me to do that, because I'm getting to know you guys. And I'll just read this one out. So Michael Bonfield says, first time able to join live, a long time subscriber. Honestly, I found your channel first and found Rogue DM Jason through you. I think you two present interesting views and perspectives. Well, thank you very much. We enjoyed this show and we want to keep doing it. I want to improve it. Well, Jason does too. I just don't like speaking for him, if that makes sense. But we want to improve it. And I know a huge part, huge part of it is kind of almost, let's make it more sort of TV show like, was my thinking. Have some intro graphics, maybe dress the set a little, because this is just our studio. We have kind of strange names for our rooms. We actually film in what we call the studio, and this is sort of Jason's room. I don't know why, I pay the mortgage, but he gets the bigger room. But, so, I suppose if you were to compare this to anyone else's house, this would sort of be the lounge. But it's upstairs, right? And it's got Jason's computer, it's got his music keyboard, which is just on camera at the back here. It's a big music keyboard. It has an out-of-tune guitar of mine. The sofa, because we watch telly in here on Jason's computer. Posters and a load of prizes, and a huge pile of washing, absolutely gigantic, and I'm not going to show you that. And that's what's in here, and it could be, if we're going to do a show, maybe we should kind of dress the room a little bit, theme it, as it were. And I'd like to do that, but there isn't really room to do that, or sort of room to do that. So that's an issue. And maybe at some point we'll start filming downstairs, but to do that we're going to need a laptop, which we haven't got. My old laptop is so broken and not powerful enough. The only thing it's done in the last 3-4 years is order pizza. So downstairs there's more room to set dress, but then of course that's the way our house is so open in its design. You do anything, you the moment you put one thing in the downstairs space, you're kind of saying this whole downstairs space is whatever that purpose is, and of course that's where our games table is. And so that whole downstairs space is essentially games table. There's a little painting studio out back, but it's still part of the same room, because it's so open in design, and of course that has an effect on acoustically as well, which isn't ideal, and it's hard floors. I do work at a television studio. I am allowed to film in that studio, and I did consider doing it tonight, but then I'd have to move so much gear to where I work to do that, because just and all it would really give us is some furniture I dislike and a video wall that's quite cool, but I have nothing really to put on it, other than the video I play when I chase the chat. So so I'd like to do some of that stuff, and I think we will going forward. The Patreon's been going brilliantly, and that is going to help us do some of this stuff. And I think we'll kind of look at using that once we've done Com Plus 2, because we left all the money in Patreon so far, because we're going to use it to help send the prizes out for Com Plus 2. Otherwise, I have no money for Christmas. But once that's done, then maybe we can look at dressing the place up a little bit and make it a bit more of a show. Because that's just aesthetic stuff, right? So I'm also thinking about the content going forward. Like maybe we need to. Do you want to hear about the latest RPG Kickstarters and new RPG products? Because that's content we could go get. We can talk to the companies. We know so many people through ConPlus now. We can get them to send us their news. But then, what is that news? Is it like tonight I spoke about Keyforge because it interested me, and I liked it, and I backed this Kickstarter myself. So I'm speaking from a position of genuinely, I think this is good. But if I'm getting news from other companies, that's just relaying press releases in essence. Is that really worthy of content? So this is like where my mind's at right now in terms of this channel and what we can do with it. Sue Savage asks, when you run a game, do you build the terrain first and base the story on it, or write the story and build the terrain around it? Well, interesting question, because because it kind of depends. Firstly, not every game I play uses terrain, so obviously terrain has nothing to do with the theatre of the mind game. For the group that I have that has we use, so basically every couple of months there's a group that meets in this house that I use terrain in, and usually I will, based on what the adventurers have just done, I will build a new terrain piece that is whatever they're going to do next. So I'll get some terrain in, I lay that out, and I figure out an encounter based on what I've built. Now, I'm not allowed to buy more terrain at the minute because we're getting married next year. So I've got and also there's no space currently. So we're not getting more terrain at the minute. I'll have to make do with what I've got, which I'm okay with. There's plenty of stuff I haven't used yet. It's fine. So I'm going to... so what I do when I run those sessions is I will come up with an encounter. And for me, the main encounter, the one I lay out before everyone arrives and is kind of set up, that's an inevitable encounter. And I don't like it to just be a battle, and there's no point laying out terrain if there isn't some kind of fight going on. So what I try to do is to make a puzzle encounter. So I like to have some kind of problem that needs to be solved. And around that, a combat of sorts is going on. Now, in the last session, that was, the old portal puzzle. It's always a good one to go back to when you're short on ideas, which I was. And the players are trying to kill the Shadow Dragon, right? So portals is a way of extending the range, so you can take the Shadow Dragon out without getting too close, which is when the Shadow Dragon will kill you. And so by doing that, I was able to get my players to kill a monster that was far too powerful for them because they had these portals they could use to extend range. But I made using the portals a puzzle, so that's a problem they had to solve. The problem with that is I might kill them. Whilst they're trying to solve the portals, they're dying to the dragon. So I had to make sure I came up with a mechanism where they could accidentally be going places whilst they're trying to figure out how to do it properly. So if they figure it out, the reward is they'll take less damage, they'll make less mistakes, but if they don't figure it out, they're still getting scattered, and that'll enable them to, scrape through the fight. So that's what I came up with for the last session, but the session before, I laid out a city with inner walls and outer walls and ruins beyond and stuff. It's a huge city set up, and I ran a siege, and I was actually a little disappointed with myself after the session, because one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to, if you ever do a big battle, there is no point rolling dice for all the creatures, right? What you want is those key moments, and you want your player characters in those key moments, and that is never fighting the rank and file. It's being are the heroes who are at the front gate as the troll bursts through and dealing with the troll whilst the orcs fight the men at arms. It's those swing moments in the battle that it doesn't matter if they lose, it just sends the battle down a different path, and it might mean one side loses the battle. It doesn't mean the failure doesn't mean death. And I always liked, whatever encounter I do, I always try to ensure, or I always want the ability for the players to fail without dying. Because you don't want to kill characters all the time, but I do want the odds of failure to be real. One of the encounters I've done in the past, for example, was the player characters stumbled across some NPC farmers, not farmers, villagers, who were building a fence. Whilst they're building a fence, those farmers came under attack by snakes. Now, this was a random encounter, but what was interesting about it was the fact the snakes are never going to kill the players. They're never going to be a problem for the players. But could the players save the villagers? There's these giant snakes, which turned out to be under the command of a salamander, were killing the villagers. Could the players save them? And, what is success in that situation? Is it every villager saved, or is it just some, or just one? As it turned out, it was just one, apparently. The players lost that scenario. So I always have this kind of, or try to have this kind of puzzle encounter. I did say I was disappointed in the city, and that's kind of goes back to the fact that as a GM, I set up an encounter, but right at the start of the stream, I also said it takes the players as well to make a truly great session. And when the players went down a course that meant they would be facing rank and file, I failed to steer them back. And consequently, the session, although it was still fun, it wasn't as good as it could have been. And so that siege session, I was disappointed in myself for not managing to make that as good as it could have been. But yeah, I always set up this sort of prime encounter, because setups take a while to put out, so I'm going to do it before people arrive. That is a guaranteed encounter. What's in that encounter might change subtly based on things that happen before the players get to it, but it will happen. What happens after that is open for anything. I may not even use miniatures for the rest of the session. Sometimes I will, like I just recently got one of the Loki Battle Map books, so last session I used that for a secondary encounter. And typically secondary encounters won't have the same kind of puzzle mechanics that the opening encounter will have. But I don't like to start straight away with the scenery encounter. Because one of the things I absolutely hate doing is starting a session in combat of any kind. Because the moment you do that, I've noticed in the past that, because what I used to do, if I got to a fight at the end of a session, I'd often leave it on a cliffhanger of that fight. And what that meant was the next session would have to start with that fight. But when you do that, you start the session with a load of dice rolling, and players don't get into the roleplay, so they don't roleplay as much. And then your whole session will be more dice heavy rather than roleplay heavy. So I always try to start the session with roleplaying. So it kind of creates this sort of anachronistic situation where I've got an encounter out the players know they're going to have, and they can look at it, but they're not on that yet. They're on some bit of RP. So I'll always start the session with some role playing. Then the encounter will happen fairly early on in the session, usually. Then we go back to some role play. That's a guarantee. There might then be a secondary encounter, which will be a more simple encounter, and then I'll finish with some role play. That's my kind of pattern for using terrain. In terms of, do I base the story on it? No. The story is always, it's an open world campaign, so the players could, if they want, go completely off plot and not worry about the threats against the world. However, there will always be threats against the world that continue to move regardless of what the players do. I create the world, I create Armageddons, and I did say that plurally, that I will have about 4 in the campaign that my players are currently in, and that will continue to happen regardless of what the players do. However, the players can change the direction of the things happening in the world. There will be things the players can influence that aren't even the Armageddons. So basically every faction in the world I will keep track of between sessions, and I will move them forward in terms of what they're doing. So every new faction that is introduced, every new key player, or I think of it as blocks of power, because sometimes a powerful person is worth tracking individually. Sometimes it's a whole empire. Sometimes it's not worth updating them between sessions because nothing was not really worthwhile saying there's no real change. But if an NPC is working towards something, they will continue to work towards something even if the players are the other side of the planet. And that's how I keep my world feeling alive. So yeah, things will always continue to unfold. And I try for the players to know about the key sort of moments of the arc of the story, but if the players show no interest in it, they won't hear all of the arcs and all of the intrigue, and it'll haunt them later when that apocalypse starts unfolding and they get absolutely drawn into it, because if an apocalypse has happened, sooner or later it's going to impact them, right? So and that's kind of what the battle was. It was because at the end of the last campaign that predated the campaign that we're now playing, at the end of the last campaign, the players didn't truly succeed in averting every apocalypse I threw at them, and the one they failed is the consequence that this campaign is based on. But I'm going to introduce some new apocalypses. In fact, all of my players have met the big bad, and as Jason mentioned last week, he went through everyone that the players had met and couldn't think who the big bad was. He guessed everybody that they met and didn't twig that it wasn't someone they spoke to. So yeah, that's basically how I do it. So the puzzle encounter is defined by the story, but the puzzle itself is often a huge challenge to come up with. So James Breeden, hello, welcome back. So James Breeden says, hello all, I hope everyone is doing well. I've had a migraine all day and Jason is off singing, so I'm having to present by myself with at the moment, a manageable headache. So, well, that brings us up to date with the chat, which is a problem because I think I've kind of spoken. Now earlier I was talking about how to deal with problem players, and so far we've dealt with dice cheats. And hi Phil, welcome back to the channel. Great to see you here as usual. Just me here this week, Phil. No Jason. So so I was talking about problem players. So we dealt with dice cheats right at the start of the stream. We've dealt with alpha gamers. We've dealt with wallflowers. But there are other kinds of problem players. And so one of them is people who aren't tracking consumables, say, or hit points, or don't roleplay their wounds. That's one I've had to deal with in the past. And I think I've mentioned a few times now that I was doing a one-on-one game with a friend, and what I didn't twig was because he wasn't really role-playing. I mean, we were doing a miniatures game. There was nobody else, no other players in the game, because it was one-on-one. It was just a kind of Sunday afternoon type game that we just both happened to be free and said, let's do a dungeon bash. So it was a more mechanical game rather than role-playing because there was no one to bounce off. And I didn't realise just how low his wounds got. So I set the final encounter up, and of course it was way too hard for him, and I got confused as to why he was sneaking around and arguing over rules, trying to do things in a hidden way. Because it never occurred to me that he actually only had 2 hit points left. And it can be an issue with players. Like, some people say that, yes, you're fully mobile right up until your last hit point, and that's because hit points are really luck, and you're not actually wounded until you're hit. But the thing is, that doesn't convey information to the rest of your party about your condition, and doesn't convey anything to the GM, which can impact the challenges that you're going to face. So I actually like to think of hit points as a kind of general level of wounding. Because whilst one punch can kill, ultimately, if you're fighting in armour, you can actually survive a bit of a pounding. So I like to think of wounds as something that impacts me in a role-playing sense. As, like, if I'm playing a wounded character, like a character on low health, I will play that character clutching themselves and so on. And yes, that does mean I take a huge narrative penalty sometimes, and I could be next to a player who's on only 1 hit point and still doing maximum damage each turn. I don't care, right? Because I'm bringing more to that character, and it's conveying more. It's also my party knows that I'm on really low health, therefore don't rely on, even if I'm playing a melee class, clearly I need healing before I tank. There's so much more in not just useful meta information conveyed by role-playing your wounds, but it's better narrative at the table too. So I like to do it, but not every player does. Like I say, there can be players on a single hit point churning out maximum damage per turn. And one of the ways I dealt with this problem at the table in the past was I used initially I used the wound counters from the Dungeons and Dragons board games. So they all come with this sort of shield bit cardboard that basically was shield with a 1 on it. That's 1 hit point, or this group one that's slightly larger that's worth 5 hit points. I started using those, and then I moved on to colour cubes, and I don't actually do it at the minute, but it was a really useful experiment at the table, because not only could you see at a glance just by looking at the space in front of a player if they're wounded or not. As a GM, that was so useful, because I could give my encounters to the health of the party, but the players didn't like it because in many ways it kind of made things feel more stage managed, which if the plot required a Dracolich, would I make that Dracolich 20 hit points because the party were wounded? And there is logic in that, but at the same time, I think players do need to give sort of feedback on this stuff. If you are critically low on health, it might have been missed. Especially if you're not tracking it. There is, of course, the old joke of how many hit points you down, and then you're not allowed to talk about hit points. That's meta, and then. Well, on a scale of 92, I look about an 18. That old joke. And I think if you just convey the information with a bit of RP, that's plenty. That does what it needs to do. So as a GM, you could try having players have hit point counters out. It might help. But I feel that. Should you then, as a GM, if somebody is low on health, say, no, look, you're low on health, you shouldn't roleplay it like that? That feels a bit confrontational. So, but, if you're having trouble with players tracking things, I think counters are a great way of ensuring that it's done, and, things are properly tracked. Like, if you're playing a game, I'm trying to think of the name of it. There was this, Mora Project. So basically, it was this old RPG system. It's quite old school now, but you were survivors of nuclear war, I think, of an apocalypse. So you had lots of tech and stuff that it turns out in the post-apocalypse, civilizations collapsed. You start with a load of tech, but once your bullets are spent, they're spent because there's no industry to replace them. So tracking resources in that game is quite important. And if you've got a player who's not good at, always seems to have infinite whatever in a game like that, where resources matter, then having counters is a great way to deal with it. But I think a lot of the problems that you get at the table are really because it's humans, and whenever you get a group of humans together, quite often you'll find that there's two people in the group that just don't get on. Maybe it's one particular problem person who's just a jerk to everyone, but most of the time it's not that. I mean, it can happen, but most of the time it's because of friction between a personality clash between two players that they really grate on each other. And there really isn't a game solution to that. I think there just isn't. Just tell them to have sex and get it over with, and then they'll all be more comfortable. That's my answer to that. But that's kind of it. I don't really have more content, so unless there's more questions, I'm probably going to sign off early and get an early night because this headache is killing me. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you, as always, to the most wonderful people in the world, who are Russell Higgins, Jolly Mangina, Umber, Mark Threlfall, Brandon Fishwick, Dave Poirier, Fuke Enterprises, Philip Bates, Elizabeth Chibradipkal, and Nate Hanshan. Thank you so much to those guys. You stay permanently on our wall as guests of honour in our home by supporting us on Patreon. So thank you so much for your support. Jason won't be back next week, but we are going to, as I said earlier, right at the start, we're going to try and do something to bring him into the show, but he is away next week. So I can't actually remember what he was doing, but I know he said he's away. I'll be by myself, and you never know, I might even use that TV studio with video wall. Who knows? Maybe. So hello, Lord Morbius, turning up right as I'm finishing. Unless, of course, you've got more RPG content you want to talk about. But assuming you don't, and the fact that I'm signing off, don't worry, this video will, obviously once YouTube's done its processing in 10-15 minutes, it'll come back online. But I am going to take an early night and tend to my wounded head. So I bid you all farewell, have great weekends, and we'll see you soon. Take care all. And of course, I did all of that goodbye and completely didn't think about setting this up in such a way that I could click a button to end the stream. There we go. I can do it now. Good night. Thank you.